So it's winter again, and someone forgot to tell me that in the desert, it doesn't only get unbearably hot, it also gets unbelievably cold. Although for a lot of you guys who know me, you know I freeze in like 75-degree weather. So if you're like me and you want something that's nice and soul warming with a little bit of a bite, hang with us because we're gonna take a classic and we're gonna give it a fiery kick. Welcome back to Cooking from Scratch. It's Melissa and I'm really excited to try this recipe out. It's a classic that everyone knows and everyone loves. It's grilled cheese and tomato soup, which is all good and fine. But if you're like me, in the winter you want something with a little bit of a bite to it. So we're going to take the dip everything in Flaming Hot Cheetos challenge and we're going to apply it where I think it can do the best work, the grilled cheese. So grab yourself a drink, crank up that music, and let's get cooking. So before we can get to the grilled cheese, we've got to get the soup sorted. Now, you can always go ahead and get a pre-made soup. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you like to squeeze in your veggies because it's still January and you're still trying to eat better, this is an application that I absolutely love doing it because it has so much flavor and you don't realize you're eating healthy food, which trust me, we're gonna need when you see what we do to the grilled cheese. So for my tomato soup, I like to do a 2-to-1 mix. 2 tomato to 1 red bell pepper. Of course, you can make it all tomato, you can make it all red bell pepper. This is completely up to you. You can totally adjust as you need. So to get us started, what you're gonna need is so first thing we need to do is we need to cut down these red bell peppers. And a little trick that I like to use is actually flipping them over on their end and then cutting from the bottom. Because this way you can kind of guess where the ribs are, or that piece of white that you normally see on the inside of the red bell pepper. It's where a lot of the heat is. And we're gonna want to avoid that because this is gonna have enough heat on its own. We don't want this to take over the flavor of the dish. So start cutting from the top, working your way to the bottom, and if we did our math right, hey, look at that, no ribs, fantastic. And now from here, you can kind of see where the rest is. Wherever the indentations are normally where they're to be found, but not always. This is gonna save us a little bit of work when we go to cut these down. There we go. Not only were we able to avoid a lot of the ribs, we were also able to avoid the seeds. That's where a lot of the heat can be found. So if the lore didn't quite hold true, it's easy to just get rid of the ribs. So just cut close on the inside of both and pinch. Some may have this slim little vein, don't worry about it. So now for these, we're gonna wanna cut these in half and then add them to our baking sheet. Now we've lined the baking sheet with a couple of cooling racks because we want these to roast, but we don't want them to boil, which means we need to keep them out of the juices that are gonna come out. So what is roasting going to do for the soup? It's going to do a couple of things. One, it's going to get some of the liquids out of not only the tomatoes, but also the red pepper, which is going to concentrate the flavor, basically boosting the amount of tomato and the amount of red pepper that you're going to taste. Second, it's also going to caramelize some of the sugar. So it's going to add a little bit of sweetness to the mix, which is going to be a really nice complement to the spiciness that comes from the red pepper. Above all, it makes sure that the soup doesn't get too watery, which is a real risk when it comes to tomatoes. Because as you can see in the tomatoes, there's a lot of water in them. And that water really has no flavor. So for our tomatoes, we're going to take these and we're going to cut them in 4ths, and then we're going to cut them again in 8ths. This is going to give us the best access to be able to get some of this liquidy membrane out along with the seeds. Now that we've got these cut down, we're going to use a spoon and we're going to get rid of some of that gel and the seeds. If you see any pieces of the center that's super white and looks pretty tough, go ahead and pull that out as well because that's not going to break down that nicely. Now that we have a gorgeous pan of tomatoes and red peppers, before we throw this into a 400-degree oven, we're gonna wanna dress them up just a bit. So take some olive oil and just drizzle it on top. And then take a good helping of salt and pepper. Now when it comes to the type of tomatoes you can use, you can really use any kind. I like using heirloom tomatoes because they look so damn pretty. Probably best bang for your buck would be Roma tomatoes. Those are tomatoes that are commonly used for making pasta sauce because it has the best ratio of tomato meat to juices. Okay, once your oven is ready, go ahead and stick this into the oven for about 40 minutes or until your kitchen starts to smell like an Italian restaurant. Now the goal here isn't to burn or char the tomatoes and the peppers. We basically just want to pull out some of the liquid and put a little bit of color on it, not a lot. Where a lot of people tend to go wrong with this is that they flame char their tomatoes and their peppers, which, trust me, looks and smell amazing, but you wind up tasting that char in the soup. There are applications where that's actually a great thing to have, it's just not in the soup. While that's going, let's talk about the second part of this equation, which is what the French like to call mirepoix. Not only is that a pain in the ass to spell, it is one of the common building blocks when it comes to cooking. Basically, it's 1 part carrot, 1 part celery, and 2 parts onion. And what this does is basically gives you a platform of flavor which to stick other things on top. Are you going to taste specifically carrot or specifically celery, or why is specifically hard to say and then put them next to those words? Or specifically onion? No, but when they come together, they give the soup a bit of a soul. For this, I actually use Vidalia onions, which are commonly known as sweet onions, because I want that sweetness to basically counteract a bit of the spiciness that we're going to get from the red pepper. Now, you can be really dedicated and hand grate all of this, but I will say if you love making soups, I would highly invest in getting a food processor. It's going to make this a lot easier and save you a lot of time. Now I know they do tend to run a little bit expensive, and if you like we can do some comparisons here on the channel, just let me know. So now that we have this all nice and finely grated, we're gonna put this in a pan with a little bit of butter and olive oil and a good amount of salt and pepper. We're going to do what's commonly called sweat. Well, us too, it's getting really warm in this kitchen. What sweating is basically doing what we're doing in the oven without any color on it. We're basically cooking this over low heat because we want a lot of that water to come out and we want these to soften, but we don't want browning. So that is the difference between sweat and saute or sweat and roast. You're pulling out the moisture, but you're not getting browning. The reason why we're not going for browning on this is because we want these vegetables to disappear in the soup. If we brown, it means that we're actually charring the edge, and these vegetables aren't going to break down as easily. You're going to have chunks of vegetable in your soup, which if that's what you like, that's great. But if you're looking for a nice, smooth consistency, you're gonna wanna sweat these. While all that's going, let's turn our attention to the star of the show, the cheese. Really, you can make grilled cheese out of anything. The most common one is to use cheddar. However, I'm not a fan of using just 100% cheddar. I like to mix mine about 50% cheddar and 50% Gruyere. Why Gruyere? Because Gruyere is a wonderfully melty cheese. Some cheddars, depending on their age and how they're pressed, don't actually like to melt all that nicely. So that's why I mix these with the Gruyere. When you put it together, you still get that wonderful cheddar flavor, but you still get the gooey, melty stringiness that everyone has to have in a grilled cheese. Take your block of cheddar and your block of Gruyere, and we're going to want to grate these as well. They don't need to be a fine grate, just a coarse grate will do, because we're going to blend it together when we put it on top of the bread. And finally, the bread. Now, you can use this with any kind of bread. My favorite is to go either French or Italian. The reason for that is this is a good sturdy bread, which means it's gonna hold up well while it's in the pan. So we'll get that nice crispness when we go ahead and fry it in the Flaming Cheetos without it really falling apart. Plus, I mean, look at that crust. It's so pretty. Oh, looks amazing, doesn't it? This is gonna taste even better once it goes in the soup. So while this is cooling, you want to be a little bit careful here. Take a fork and just carefully pry off the skin off of what's remaining on the tomatoes. If you don't get all of it, that's fine, but you do want to get a fair amount of it off. Once you got the skins off of this, we're going to add it to our pot, add in our chicken broth, and then we're going to let that simmer for about 30 minutes while the flavors can get to know each other. So now the soup is pretty much done. We can turn our attention to the sandwich. So we're gonna start off with the bread. Cut ourselves a good, I'd say about a 3/4 inch slice. We want a bit of crust, but not so much that the heat can't actually find its way to the cheese. Now you may find some of these might be a little problematic because, well, they've got a giant hole in them. You just gotta work around. So we're gonna take our slices and take any kind of mayo, or what I'm using, which is a roasted garlic aioli, which aioli is just a fancy word for fancy mayo. We're gonna take our aioli and then we're going to just lightly coat what will be the top and the bottom of the sandwich. Not only is this gonna help with browning, this will also help to keep this sticking. So take your side that's coated and you're gonna dip it into the Flaming Cheetos mixture. If you find it doesn't want to cooperate, you can always drizzle some on top and just kind of press it in. But remember, you don't want to do too much because you don't want this crust to come off. So to that end, we're actually going to put olive oil and butter into the pan to make sure that we give this the best chance to not stick. And there you have it. A dinner guaranteed to warm the soul. Thank you so much for watching. If you guys make this, please take a picture and tag me down below on my social media. I'd love to see when you guys come up with variations on this. If you know of someone who loves grilled cheese, you want to hit the share button and send them the link to the video, that'd be great. Be sure to check in next week as we take a look at those meals in a box delivery systems and see, are you really getting your money's worth? If you'd like to get the notification for that, please hit the subscribe button down below, and I will see you, awesome people, after dinner. Bye!